In this video, we're going to take a look at the 5 methods we can use to solve quadratic equations. There are some strengths and weaknesses to each one. For example, square roots can be used only part of the time, whereas completing the square quadratic formula can always be used. Graphing, solving graphically, can also always be used, but you might not get a precise answer, which is one of the weaknesses of solving graphically. Completing the square can get very complicated quickly as well. Quadratic formula, you have to remember the formula, but it's fairly easy to plug into the answers. So let's take a look at each one. When looking at square roots, I can solve by taking the square roots anytime I have something of the form x squared plus 81 is equal to 0. So anytime I have something being squared plus or minus something else without an x, I subtract 81 from both sides. I get x squared is equal to negative 81. Let's go ahead and change this to a minus, actually. It should be a minus sign. So let's make that a positive. Okay, at this point, I can solve by just taking the square root of both sides, keeping in mind that it's really plus or minus. So I am left with x can either equal positive 9 or negative 9, and that's what that plus or minus means right here. If I had kept this negative as I had it originally, that has a negative 81, so this was positive, this was negative, the square root of a negative number I couldn't do, so that would be your no solution. And if for some reason I had the square root of 0, it would be the one solution, x equals 0. So one other example. If I give you 4x squared minus 40, let's make this just 48, is equal to 0. Okay, something that doesn't come out evenly. I still add the 48 to both sides. I get 4x squared is equal to 48. I need to divide by 4 before I can take the square root. So I get x squared is equal to 12. I'm still going to take the square root on both sides, making sure I do the plus or minus. So x will equal plus or minus the square root of 12, which I can also then reduce. Square root of 12 is 4 times 3. So the square root of 4 is 2, and then the square root of 3 I'm left with. So this would be the fully simplified answer. For right now, I would also accept the square root of 12. Let's go a step further. Okay, factoring. To solve by factoring, I'm going to use the same process I did before, at least when it comes to factoring. So, given that 15x squared plus 47x minus 10 is equal to 0, I'll use this problem. I'm going to take my a term times my c term, multiply and get negative 150. Okay. If I look at 50 times negative 3, I get the negative 150. 50 plus negative 3 gives you that 47x. So I'm going to break it up as 15x squared. I'm going to change it to plus 50x minus 3x, and then minus 10 is equal to 0. I solve by grouping, putting the plus sign in the middle. Out of the first parentheses, I can factor out a 5x, leaving me with 3x plus 10. Out of the second parentheses, I can factor out a negative 1, leaving me with 3x plus 10 is equal to 0. I have 5x minus 1 times 3x plus 10 is equal to 0. So once it is factored, what I have to keep in mind is that I really have two things that multiply to give me 0. So what that means is that either the 5x minus 1 has to equal 0, or the 3x plus 10 has to equal 0. So I solve. 5x is equal to 1. X can equal 1/5. Or over here on the right, 3x can equal negative 10. So x can equal negative 10/3. So these would be my two solutions I was looking for. Now keep in mind, important part about factoring, you have to have it equal to 0. Okay? For factoring, for graphing, and for using the quadratic formula, you always have to have your equation in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. Basically, this being ax squared plus or minus bx plus or minus a c value is going to equal 0. You have to move your equation so it is in that format in order to be able to fully factor, okay, or fully solve these for the two solutions. If it's not factorable, it means that you have to look for another method. You can't just say it's not factorable, there's no solution. So just keep that in mind as well. The third method is, okay, if I'm solving graphically, I'm looking for where the x-intercepts are. Okay. So at this point, I think you're all okay with when it comes to graphing an equation. Okay, so you can solve it graphically. Y is equal to the ax squared plus bx plus c, okay, which is equal to 0. By setting it equal to 0, what it means is that you're actually looking for where the x-intercepts are. So in this case, if I'm given the function y is equal to x squared minus 4x minus 5, the two solutions are the fact that x will equal 5 and x will equal negative 1. The way you can solve for this is if you double tap on the screen, or at least with this particular program, you find your x-intercepts, okay, which is actually, it's saying find roots. Roots is another word kind of for the x-intercepts, as is solutions to the equation, okay, they're all sort of interchangeable. So to find the x-intercepts, you click find roots, okay, you're going to look up here, it'll say x is equal to maybe negative 1, and then it'll tell you 0. What that means is the y value is 0 when x equals negative 1. Basically the fact that yes, it is that x-intercept, it is that root. And then you can go through and then you can tap the other one, okay? So I would tap right here, okay? Double tap, find roots, okay? Tap here, look for this, particularly that this is 0, and then write down that x value. And then I would tap here, okay, get the x value, 0, and then I can double tap the screen, and that will clear me out of that finding roots. Completing the square becomes a little bit more difficult of process and can get very messy when it comes to completing the square. Okay, what you're basically going to do, if I take that x squared minus 4x minus 5 is equal to 0, you're going to leave it as x squared minus 4x. You're going to move the 5 over to the other side. You're going to look at this b value. It's going to be the negative 4. You're going to divide it by 2 and you're going to square it. So 4 divided by 2 is 2 squared, means that I'm going to add 4 here, which means I also add 4 here. So what that then tells me is that I can factor this here is a special case. It's going to be x. I pick up the negative sign from here and I take the square root of 4, which gives me 2. And that's going to be quantity squared is going to equal 9. So then I take the square root of both sides, keeping in mind the plus or minus. Kind of going back to method 1 with taking the square roots. I have x minus 2 is equal to this plus or minus the square root of 9, which is plus or minus 3. I add 2 to both sides, so I get 2 plus or minus 3. So 2 plus 3 is going to be 5. 2 minus 3 is negative 1. I've got the same solutions as what I had graphically. Now let's say this becomes a little bit more complicated. Let's say I have 2x squared minus 8x minus 10, and that's going to equal 0. Let's actually make this plus 11. Yeah, I can do that minus 10 actually. My first step is I have to have this a value being 1. So I need to divide everything by 2. Actually, let's go ahead and change that 10. Let's make that minus 4. So just make it minus 36. So I would divide by 2, leaving me with x squared minus 4x minus 18, which I'm going to move to the other side as positive 18. I'm still going to do the same step. Take this, divide by 2 and square it, so it's plus 4 plus 4. So I get quantity of x minus 2 being squared is equal to 22. I'm still going to take the square root of both sides. In this case, the square root of 22 doesn't come out evenly. So I have x minus 2 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 22. I can add 2 to both sides, so I get 2 plus or minus the square root of 22 being my two solutions. And I could plug those into a calculator and get the decimal answer, or I could just leave it as 2 plus or minus the square root of 22. So completing the square is, the steps are pretty easy, okay? But this here can get very messy with the square roots. Also here with dividing by 2 and squaring, if it gets into fractions, can become kind of challenging, okay? But it's an essential skill to know. The fifth step, or the fifth method with the quadratic formula, is probably the most widely used way of solving equations. The formula, x equals the opposite of b, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a, is probably one of the most commonly memorized formulas and most commonly used formulas. You have to know it. Okay, so I showed you some video clips on YouTube. If you go to YouTube and Google or search YouTube for quadratic formula songs, you can get the one melody "Pop Goes the Weasel," the "Are You Sleeping?" the Quadratic. You even have Adele's "Rolling in the Deep," as I showed you with the words. Music is a great way of memorizing the formula, or you can just learn it. Okay, where it gets the a, b, and 3 from is that if I look back at the x squared minus 4x minus 5 equation is equal to 0, you have to have the equation set equal to 0. The a value is always in front of the x, so here I have a is equal to 1. The b value is always in front of the x, so a is in front of x squared, b is in front of x, and the c value is always at the end. Be careful with signs. That's the most common problem with the quadratic formula is the signs. I always figure out what the b squared minus 4ac part is first. This here is what's called the discriminant. Okay. And if I get that if the discriminant works out to be a negative number, I know there's no solutions and I don't have to go any further, which is always kind of nice. And even if it's not, it saves me some simplifying later on, particularly underneath the square root and a lot of rewriting. So if I have negative 4 being squared, gives me a positive 16. That first term should always work out to be positive. Minus 4 times 1 times negative 5. Here, be really careful with this negative sign and this negative sign. They cancel out, becoming a positive. 4 times 1 times 5 is 20. So here I get 36. When I look at the quadratic formula, okay, I know that it's going to have two solutions because I end up with a positive discriminant. Positive value for the discriminant. So the opposite of b is going to be a positive 4 plus or minus the square root of 36, which is 6, all over 2 times 1. So here I get 4 plus or minus 6 over 2. 4 plus 6 is 10. 10 divided by 2 is 5. 4 minus 6 is negative 2. Negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1. So that ends up giving me my solution there. 9 times out of 10, these don't work out evenly. If it does work out evenly, it means I could have used factoring to solve as well. If it doesn't work out evenly, that means that it's not factorable. So let's take another one. View 3x squared minus 7x minus 10 is equal to 0. Okay, once again, you notice that it's set equal to 0. I list off my a value is 3, my b value is negative 7, my c value is negative 10. Then I look at b squared minus 4ac. Okay, my discriminant. B squared negative 7 squared minus 4 times 3 times negative 10. Negative 7 squared is 49. Okay, the two negatives cancel out. 4 times 3 is 12. 12 times 10 is 120. Okay, and unfortunately it's going to work out again. I'm looking good. Okay, taking the square roots. The 169, okay, square root of 169 is going to be 13, but so my x value is the opposite of b, which is positive 7, plus or minus the square root of 169, which ends up being 13, okay, over 4 times 3. So this is going to be 7 plus or minus 13 over 12. 7 plus 13 is 20 over 12, reduces down to 10/6. Sorry, let's go even further. Okay, they're both divisible actually by 4, so it's 5/3. Or 7 minus 13 is negative 6. Negative 6 over 12 is going to be negative 1/2. So those are my two solutions for this. Okay, once again, since the square root of 169 worked out evenly, it was able to be simplified relatively easily. 9 times out of 10, that's not going to be the case. Let's try it again. Let's do 5x squared minus x minus 6. No, let's make that minus 9 is equal to 0. A is equal to 5, B is equal to negative 1, C is equal to negative 9. So it's B squared minus 4AC is negative 1 squared minus 4 times 5 times negative 9. So it's going to be 1 plus 20, 180. So it's going to be 181. So x is going to equal the opposite of b, which is positive 1, plus or minus the square root of 181 over 2 times 5. So it's basically going to be 1 plus or minus the square root of 181 over 9. Okay, and I could try and simplify this. Actually, that's going to be 10. Sorry. Okay, but 9 times out of 10, we'll just leave that there, with the exception of possibly simplifying the square root, which there's nothing obvious that glares out on me to simplify. So those are the steps. Hopefully this video has been helpful to you, at least in reviewing the different strategies for solving the quadratic formula.